All right, welcome everybody, and welcome to another episode of VALR Unfiltered, Money, Meaning, and Society. And today I'm very happy to welcome David Gitonga to the podcast. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You can surely correct me if I said it wrongly. But welcome, David.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me. Yes, and you pronounced it correctly. It's Gitonga.
For what's the meaning of Gitonga? Is there a meaning to it?
It is Gitonga in my native language means a rich man. I'm definitely not a rich man, but it means rich man.
Okay, well, that's excellent. And it's very fitting for the podcast as well. Of course, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin and what's happening in your country, which is Kenya, and maybe even kind of explore the concept of what it means really to be rich in a way. Is it really about money? So of course, David is the director and founder of Bitcoin Kenya, a well-known publication in Kenya that kind of covers Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain innovation. So David, before we start, maybe you can take a little bit of time to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, so again, thanks for having me, Ben. So my name is David Gitonga. I'm the founder and the CEO of BitKE. So BitKE is, as you described correctly, it's a media outlet that covers the crypto blockchain Web3 ecosystem, not just in East Africa, but also across the continent. We've been doing this for the last, I would say, 7 years or so. But my journey in the space goes way back to 2015. That was in the early days of the crypto space here in Kenya, but also really across the continent. So back in 2015, I was working with a local exchange, and I was doing media work for them, and really that's how I got introduced into the space. And over time, I realized, a lot more people need to, understand and learn more about this space. So it would take about 3 years for me to decide, okay, I think we need a platform. We need a way to communicate to more people. Because back then, I remember if you wanted to learn anything, maybe attend an event, or maybe know who's selling Bitcoin somewhere, or where can I buy or sell my crypto? There really wasn't a place to do that. So when BitKE started, it was during those early days where people would come to see, where can I go buy Bitcoin or buy crypto? What's happening in the space, right? Is there an event near me that I can attend and learn more? So that was really how BitKE was born. And I feel like because of that need, we've been able to grow successfully, because the foundations were really out of a need that existed in the market.
That's very interesting. So your first job was actually with an exchange. Is that what you say?
Correct, correct. I didn't even know what an exchange was back then. I mean, I would later realize, oh, okay, an exchange, buys, sells Bitcoin and crypto. So I learned a lot of those things while I was working for them.
It's very interesting. It's actually very similar to myself and my own journey into Bitcoin. Back then I was living in Hong Kong and working with different types of companies. Some were more focused on security or um, remittances, and even some company was focused on diamonds. And so actually, as you write about things, you learn about it. And similarly, I ended up, I don't know, writing for some blockchain company, and it led me to write about Bitcoin. And as I was writing about it, I became very interested in the space, and also made my way to an exchange at the time. So probably a very similar journey, right? Through writing, you actually learn a lot.
Correct. I mean, I always tell people media has allowed me to learn a lot more. Up to now, it's really interesting. If people want to learn more about what startup is doing this or that, they usually kind of come to me and ask me, who's doing this or that. So it's ended up also allowing me to meet a lot of people. I've met you Ben because of the work. I've met many other people because of that. I really feel like it's contributed to me being here.
I mentioned your name to our co-founder of Valor, Farzam Esani, and he was very familiar with you, actually. I don't know if you've met him in person, but he was surely very familiar with you.
So it's interesting. I have chatted with Fazam. We've never met in person.
Mm.
He did tell me he's grown up in Kenya, yes, but
Right, right.
you but I've never met him, but we've had chats. He's always asking me about the market and what's happening. So we exchange, information. I've actually known, Vala since the early days. I think we've covered Vala for many, many years. So it's a journey that I've also, I've seen you guys grow as well. So congratulations as well on your growth.
Thank you very much, of course. I think, for Farzam, Kenya, of course, holds a special place in his heart because he grew up there. And he's very familiar with that country. But, what we've seen with Valor is that over at least the past year, after South Africa, a lot of our users have been coming from Kenya, actually. And that's not because we've been targeting Kenya, we don't advertise in Kenya. Um, so it's just kind of emerged as another potential market to focus on. And so we're really seriously exploring Kenya as a potential market for us. Um, it's really wonderful. Valor, of course, what makes Valor quite unique is that uh, it's really born in Africa, right? It's an African-born exchange. It's very big in South Africa, and the largest exchange by trade volume in Africa as a whole. I think is something to be proud of. And of course, from my end, coming from Hong Kong and from the Asian side, I'm more familiar with the Asian exchanges. Um, but I think Valor, is on par with the global exchanges in terms of the quality of product and yeah. I have really high hopes for Valor in Africa and globally. And I think this conversation, part of the reason why I wanted to have it with you is really to explore Kenya in more depth. Also to kind of speak to our audience who are partially, part of our audience is from Kenya, so probably you're a familiar face to them. So I have a whole bunch of questions for you, David. I hope you can enlighten me today.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, more than happy to, talk more about Kenya, and I also believe that, this is a market that's ready for, exchanges like Vala to enter. So yeah, more than happy to have a chat and educate our listeners.
Okay, thank you so much. So, first I want to start a little bit with, just looking at Bitcoin and crypto adoption in Kenya. What does it look like so far? Is it more retail driven? Has there been any interest from corporations, from institutions? Just looking back over well, since you've been in this space, 2015, like how have you seen it evolve?
I think a lot of the growth that happened prior and now there's a shift. So back then, when I got into this space, I would say a lot of the adoption was in the retail space. So these are very early adopters. So people who knew what Bitcoin is, they believed in the ethos of the ecosystem. So they were really, really quite early. I've met a few of them. They are really individuals, right? Maybe individuals who had, a few dollars here and there, and they were looking for where do I invest this money? And that's how the early exchanges, they are no longer in the market, got some of their first set of clients. But over time, what I've seen is there has been a shift in terms of who is getting into this space. While retail is still a huge market, with P2P, being, really big because largely being driven by retail, I feel like there's also a new market in terms of businesses and SMEs that are exploring this ecosystem, particularly with the emergence of stablecoins. I mean, we've seen it across the world, right? Where stablecoins are now becoming, you know, they say the killer app, right? I would almost say they are they've brought an actual use case for businesses, especially in this market. So I know a few fintechs that are exploring getting into the space largely because they want to service their clientele. So their clientele are either doing cross-border payments, or they have a remittance product. So there's a shift in that direction in terms of the user base, and I feel like this particular sector is a much larger market compared to retail, because with retail, as you're aware, it really takes a lot of effort and education just to onboard a client or a customer. So and you have to do it on a one-on-one basis. But with fintechs and with businesses, it's a mass market where a fintech is moving millions of dollars a month. So being able to onboard that one fintech can make a whole lot of difference. So that's what we are seeing: a lot of businesses, a lot of SMEs being interested in this market, and I think it will only grow bigger.
How is Kenya kind of embedded in the global financial world? Is it easy or difficult to move money in and out of the country? Is it easy or difficult for people to potentially hold US dollar if they wanted to? So apart from stablecoins, right? Just general basic US dollar, like what's the culture there, the financial, and what are the financial restrictions?
I think one thing that makes Kenya unique, and I'll compare it with, say, South Africa, where I know there are very strict capital controls. Kenya really doesn't have a capital control sort of regulation, right? It's a very open market, and I've had a lot of businesses say that. I've had a lot of people say, or a lot of businesses, why they set up in Kenya is because there's no capital, like very stringent capital controls. So what you'll find is, because of that, there's really no problem about when it comes to moving money or the amount of money you can move out of the country. Where the problem comes is access, access to, say, dollars.
Mm, mm,
So for many, many years, Kenya has had a problem with a shortage of dollars. It's always been there, but I think on more recently with media attention, and especially even with stablecoins coming in, I think that has been highlighted even further. We saw it particularly about 1 or 2 years ago, where there was a serious dollar crunch, where you'd go to a bank and you say, I want to buy 100,000, or I want to exchange 100,000 shillings worth of dollars, or I want $100,000, and you wouldn't even get it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it became such a problem, and part of why a lot of fintechs and companies have adopted stablecoins was being driven by that shortage. The government says there's less shortage now, but the shortage still exists.
Mm-hmm,
I don't think there's a bank in Kenya you go and say, I want $1 million, and you're able to get it in an instant. It's still a challenge. So I would say that's kind of gives you a picture of the climate, of the environment. I hope that that answers your question.
Yeah, that helps. Would you say that in Kenya, how do people traditionally preserve wealth? I understand there's a shortage of US dollars, so it's probably quite expensive to get. There might be some black markets. Um, is there a gold market? Do people buy and save gold, physical gold, I mean? Is it more real estate? Like what do just everyday Kenyans do to preserve wealth?
All right. So what happens in Kenya is there has been a boom of the real estate market. and it's been going on for a couple of years. And the speculation is a lot of wealth preservation goes into real estate. And even when you look at, Kenya in general and the market, the capital city Nairobi, if you look at the real estate, you see just how priced it is. Nairobi is expensive markets in Africa if you're looking for property to buy.
So you were saying that Nairobi is quite expensive, and a lot of people use real estate, especially high net worth individuals. And then you were just about to speak beyond real estate, how people kind of preserve their wealth.
So I think beyond real estate, and just even before I move out of that, you'll see that a lot of land right now. There's also a drive toward investment in real estate related investments. So it could be land, bare land. It could be property, or it could be you buy land and you want to, either build for either a school or an institution. So it's very much related to that. There's been a rise of businesses in the real estate space, whether they are hardware outlets or just, machinery, farming. So the diversification is really very much around the real estate market. Beyond that, of course, there are a few investments in terms of bonds. So Kenya always has, the infrastructure bonds. When the Kenya government floats infrastructure bonds, they are always oversubscribed by billions of Kenya shillings. So a lot of people, again, I perceive, are looking for different ways of investing, more secure ways of investing. Because if you look at real estate, most people invest in real estate because of the perceived security of real estate. And it's the same thing if you hear conversations around media in Kenya is bonds, infrastructure bonds, or government issued bonds have a sense of security. So there's a big drive toward those kinds of investments. And to a lesser extent, of course, crypto, Bitcoin has also come into the picture, but I would say it's still early. That conversation is still a long way off. But yeah, the drive is largely toward more secure forms of, investments.
Yeah, I understand. I can imagine, of course, that stable coins are very important, especially if it's so difficult to get US dollars. Um, and, of course, we should celebrate that, and it's wonderful. But I also kind of say, generally, I hold the position that ultimately stable coins are tokenized fiat. And so while maybe, of course, the US dollar is stronger than the Kenyan shilling, um, from a Bitcoin perspective, you might say that the future of the US dollar over the long term is not necessarily very bright. For example, I wouldn't say, hold some USDT and keep it in your wallet for 100 years. That might not actually be the best, give you the best outcome. So I don't know, of course, how people in Kenya generally look at Bitcoin. Is it seen for what it is? Is it a form of digital gold, digital real estate? Is it just for speculation? Of course, I'm sure it mirrors kind of global trends, but you have a good sense probably of kind of the awareness of Bitcoin. Is it taken seriously as a potential reserve asset? How do people talk about it across the board when it comes to Bitcoin?
So I'd say the conversation around Bitcoin is complicated, right? Because in fact, let me just slightly go back. The people who are familiar with Bitcoin or who invest in Bitcoin are usually well-informed individuals, and if they're not well-informed, they are really well capitalized. So from that perspective, you'll realize that the conversation around Bitcoin is is more of again of an investment. So you find that someone is holding Bitcoin because a Bitcoin was $10,000 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and if I hold it now, if because I hear a lot of these conversations where people will be like, um, I wish I bought Bitcoin 5 years ago. Right now, I would I would have $2-3 million. Or you hear a conversation like, um, I bought Bitcoin. I bought 100 Bitcoin. I once met a guy told me I bought 100 Bitcoins back in 2010, and that's my Range Rover out there. I sold, and I bought that Range Rover. So that those are the kind of conversations you hear a lot. A friend of mine recently just told me, they were hanging out with a couple of friends, high net worth, guys, and they started, you know, showing him the wallets, and he was shocked, because he didn't realize that there are people in Kenya who have that kind of wealth in Bitcoin. But again, they are sort of high net worth. They are not really in a hurry to sell off. So this is like sort of an investment. So that's how the conversation over time has transitioned. I remember just before I started BitKe back in 2017, a lot of the driving forces for people to get into Bitcoin were uh, guys who had held Bitcoin for 5 or 6 years, and they had accumulated a lot of wealth around that. And a lot of people who are getting into crypto was because they wanted to be like those
Mm.
guys. So that's how the conversation has evolved. And so you realize a lot of people who get into Bitcoin are getting into Bitcoin because they know someone who's made their wealth, in Bitcoin, or they hold so much Bitcoin. So I don't think that has changed much, and I feel like that's how we need to look at the way Kenyans perceive crypto and Bitcoin.
But I think it's fair, that's a fair way of looking at it. And maybe that's just how it is for the next few years that people hear success stories. They think, you know what, I should also get into Bitcoin. There's always the question, am I too late? And then you'll have some maximalist, including myself, maybe, who will say like, well, it's actually still quite early, you know. So I think it's very interesting, and people who get into Bitcoin, even if they get into it to get rich, let's say, over time they become more educated around it. Every time Bitcoin is volatile, they have to they have to reassess their beliefs, reassess their convictions, really think about, why am I in Bitcoin again? Do I believe it has a long-term future? So I think there's also some education that kind of happens once you start holding and investing, as you say, or allocating to Bitcoin. Um, People like Michael Saylor, of course, I'm sure people are familiar now with what's happening with Michael Saylor and strategy, buying Bitcoin, or the US talking about a strategic reserve. So all these things, right? They do add to the knowledge base. So, I had a question. I'm familiar a little bit with M-Pesa. I know that it has been and it might still be very popular. And some people might say that this experience in the country with cashless transactions um, makes it easier for Kenya to adopt crypto. However, um, based on my very distant observations, I was thinking that might actually not be the case. Meaning, maybe crypto, Bitcoin, stablecoins, maybe they're a threat to something like M-Pesa. And so I don't know if that's really how it is. You might be much better to shed some light on that. Do you think the whole experience with M-Pesa as cashless transactions, I think it's mobile money, is that helpful for the adoption of crypto and Bitcoin, or is it actually something, you know, is it kind of another form of innovation that competes with crypto? How do you look at that in Kenya?
Yeah, uh, I've actually had multiple discussions with people on this, and personally, I feel like the success of M-Pesa, because M-Pesa is really the de facto way of payment now in Kenya. M-Pesa is now a verb. Lack of a better word. If you want to send money to someone, you say, "I'll M-Pesa you,"
Mm,
or "Can you M-Pesa?" So it's really very ingrained, and it's quite understandable. It's been around for 18 years. M-Pesa was celebrating 18 years this year, and as you can imagine, that obviously makes it very difficult to sort of compete with. Um, so personally, I feel like M-Pesa will limit stablecoin, and actually by extension even crypto adoption in this market, because M-Pesa is quite efficient. It's quite stable. It's quite reliable, and it's available. And those are some of the things that people look for when they are seeking a means of transacting, or just a means of being able to move around. I mean these days, if you go with public transport, you no longer have to carry cash. You simply pay with M-Pesa even. So it becomes a difficult conversation when you try to say, you can substitute M-Pesa with, Bitcoin, or with even stable coins, right? Because
mm.
when you're talking about stable coins, if we talk about the US dollars, for example, like no one really, like very few businesses would say they accept US dollars as a form of payment here. I know the travel industry does, but it's really, I met a few guys from the travel industry a few months ago, and some of them accept stable coins, but they were looking for ways of, hey, how do I cash out? How do I exchange this money back to Kenyan shillings? Or I need to pay for something, but I need US dollars, but I can't get them. How can I get stable coins? I have M-Pesa.
Mm.
If you want M-Pesa, I can give it to you. So as you can see, the environment is really is built. The payment industry in Kenya is built around mobile money. So you either have to work around that. You're either on the fringes of that, where mobile money is not able to cross, and that's why cross-border with stablecoins is becoming a big deal in Kenya. But if you're on a retail level, I would say that's really challenging. If stablecoins were to stand one-on-one with mobile money on M-Pesa.
No, I understand, but is M-Pesa, I'm assuming it's pegged to the Kenyan shilling?
Yes, one M-Pesa shilling is equal to an actual.
Yeah, so do you guys not suffer from inflation, or is inflation quite moderate in Kenya? So, because what I would understand is M-Pesa and Kenyan shilling is good for everyday transactions. You go you take a bus or you pay for some groceries. But when it comes to kind of saving money, investing, then maybe stable coins, Bitcoin, real estate comes up. Um, what does inflation look like in Kenya? Is it a serious thing or not?
Inflation is actually not a, a serious thing in Kenya. In fact, I think over the last 1 year or so, it's gone down. So Kenyans, you'll never really hear a question of inflation on the short term. Over the long term, yes. Over the long term, there has been inflation, but for an everyday user, an everyday retail person, inflation really doesn't come up in their conversations.
That's very good news, and I think that's quite, that's kind of it stands out, not just in an African context, but just across emerging markets around the world. Like South Africa suffers from inflation, Turkey, Argentina, Zimbabwe. There are plenty of places around the world suffer from inflation in a big way. So it's very good to hear actually for I guess for the Kenyan people that they do have a money that they can kind of rely on at least for the short term. Um, so that's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. Like the Kenya shilling to the dollar will just fluctuate in terms of it's either 126 shillings to the dollar or 130 shillings to the dollar. You're not going to get something like what you see in Nigeria, where in 2 months, the naira has doubled, tripled. That's a really I've not experienced that even here in Kenya. So yeah, I don't think inflation is such a problem, and I don't think inflation is the reason why people get into crypto in Kenya.
It's interesting, but is that I mean I don't know the background of the Kenyan shilling. Is it pegged at all to the US dollar? Is there some policy there, or it just happens to be stable because of the economy?
So the Kenya shilling is not pegged to to anything.
Mm.
Really, it's okay. It's pegged to the dollar. Yes, it's pegged to the dollar. The CBK gives daily rate based on the dollar. But in terms of its stability, I would say it's the political environment also plays a huge role in that. Kenya is fairly stable, I have to say, despite the few demonstrations here and there and people complaining about the economy. I would say from a geopolitical perspective, Kenya is fairly stable. A lot of the countries within East Africa, there's been a huge influx of neighboring uh, citizens coming into Kenya to look for work. So there's a
Mhm.
huge influx of, for example, people from Somali, from Rwanda, from Burundi. So they consider the Kenyan economy, fairly stable. There are opportunities here. So I feel like within the East African market, that also contributes to the currency stability.
Yeah, I understand. That's actually wonderful to hear. I like positive and optimistic news. Um, so, how about a strategic reserve? So, do you see any corporations that are starting to hold Bitcoin on corporate treasuries? Do you see this trend emerging in Kenya? We've seen it recently in South Africa with one of the first companies to do it. Um, Altfest Capital. Of course, we've seen it in Japan with Meta Planet. We've seen it in the US with a bunch of companies. I've seen it in China with a company called Meitu, but I think they eventually had to drop that kind of Bitcoin Ethereum reserve. Do you see any trends like that? Do you see companies that are starting to, especially public companies, that are starting to explore Bitcoin as part of their balance sheet?
So are there companies that are doing that? No, not.
Not yet.
Can we expect them? Yeah, yes, likely. So not yet, but the way things are going, I would not be surprised if that happens, because again, the progression of regulation. Now, I think Kenya is already one of the countries in Africa where we are definitely going to have some form of crypto regulation by any time this year, hopefully. Um, Also taxation. There's already uh, it's been approved, some taxation, a withholding tax. Now crypto companies have to pay a 1.5% withholding tax. So these rules and guidelines are already being shaped, and I feel like that has been one of the reasons why we are not seeing corporations or institutions get in. They are quite, um, the regulation is Kenya can be quite tough, and it can cost you a lot if you misstep. So I feel like once a form of regulation is in place, we might start to see some of these institutions come in. Actually, recently the Central Bank of Kenya revealed a survey that showed that 31%, about a third of all banks in Kenya, are open to cryptocurrencies. And that has been very well received, because it means that if there's some form of regulation, because currently there's a regulation by CBK that financial institutions cannot touch cryptocurrencies. So if there's a form of regulation that allows that to happen, then I would not be surprised to see more of these institutions open and ready to engage.
That's actually very amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, it takes a while, right? Central banks always move very slowly, and they're very conservative. But it seems to be very different from, let's say, a Nigeria, where they are dealing with very strong inflationary pressures, and a lot more is at stake, it seems. You know what? I'm very curious then about. So you do see regulation taking shape. Um, So from what I understand, at the moment, the peer-to-peer markets are pretty strong. I'm assuming people can also buy stablecoins using M-Pesa, and that's part of that whole P2P network, probably. Is that the way for people to get into crypto at the moment, where it's just kind of peer-to-peer, maybe on a platform like Binance? Like, what does it currently look like for people, the way they get from fiat into crypto?
Yeah, so I would say the Kenyan market is dominated by peer-to-peer. So those are the platforms that are thriving right now, especially the Binance P2P platform. We've had other
Right.
P2P platforms, and actually even for centralized exchanges that get into this market, they either have to build out a form of P2P platform for it to even be viable in the first place. Other than
Mm.
that, in terms of centralized exchanges that have gotten into the market, they haven't really been successful, because remember, you can't plug in an exchange and buy from a bank or even from a fintech. Most people just will not touch a crypto. So P2P becomes almost the only way out for a lot of these entities. Again, it's all because of regulation, and I feel like uh, if there is a form of regulation, then there might be a possibility of people buying directly from exchanges. Yeah, but we are not there yet.
Yes, and the peer-to-peer market is I assume is a kind of a gray area at the moment. Is it illegal, or is it legal?
It's neither legal nor illegal, so it's somewhere in between. It's
Gray
it's it's a
market.
gray area, as you put it, actually. So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, most people dabble in it, not knowing. I mean, I've seen people get defrauded on a P2P market, go
yeah,
to the police, and there's really nothing the police can do, because there's no regulation, or it's a very gray area, for example. So yeah, it's really
yeah.
gray. The upcoming regulation, I'm not sure whether it even addresses the P2P market, but yeah, it remains gray for now.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, do banks earn fees or even M-Pesa? So when transactions are made, let's say somebody wants to buy 5,000 US dollar worth of stable coins, they send it via P2P. Are there transaction fees incurred? Or, and I don't mean on the platform itself. I mean at the banking level or by M-Pesa? Or is this all free? Is transferring money free in Kenya?
So depending on how you transfer the money, so most of the transactions are the average transactions that you'd pay. So say I'm sending money to you, I would pay a certain fee. So those charges apply, because remember, the banks and M-Pesa are not involved in this transaction. They are probably not even aware this was a crypto transaction in the
Correct.
first place.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. So the charges remain and everything else remains, just like it was any other transaction.
Yeah, I'm asking, of course, because if even if the banks don't want to touch crypto at the moment, and let's say M-Pesa doesn't want to touch crypto, if the peer-to-peer market is big, and if fees are being charged, then it's not likely that they will stop it, right? Because then there's money to be earned, and it's kind of happening in the gray area. And yeah, and then I assume the merchants, the Kenyan merchants who are actually facilitating the kind of interchange between crypto and fiat, um, they're probably earning quite well as well. Yeah. So this becomes an industry.
Yeah, I mean, I would say actually that's what's driving this market. If you look at the peer-to-peer traders, that's a business. I know a number who run that business. In terms of banks, I have heard of banks who are aware that these are P2P transactions, but they as long as they're opening new accounts and and there's a transaction, I mean, why would they mind what's happening beyond their realm? So
Yes.
there's of course a lot of value for them because they are earning fees. And I also feel like P2P traders always have a way of figuring out how to navigate these environments. So
Yep.
I think the just pullback, I would say, is coming from government when it looks at the macro economy, and they're like, if this trade happens, will we end up like Nigeria, right, where the Kenyan shilling is devalued or something like that. I think that's where the big concern is. But from a banking or M-Pesa level, I don't really think that's a concern. It's actually business for them.
It's very fascinating. I've seen this in different countries. For example, in China, China has a lot of payment methods like WeChat Pay and Alipay and all of this. And back then, a few years ago, the platform where I was active, where I worked, also had a peer-to-peer platform, and all of these payment methods were available. And there were these merchants in China who were just able to navigate that, as you say. Same in Vietnam. Right now, I'm in Vietnam. There's a thriving peer-to-peer market here. And whether it's at jewelry shops where you can get your USDT, and or whether it's via the kind of local digital payment gateways, bank transfers, yeah, it works, right? So it's a very important kind of, you could say it's like a pre-regulatory, like a pre-regulation market. It's very important. And then when regulation does come into play, right? Because Kenyans, I think, I don't know what the estimates are, but it from what I've seen, it could be around maybe a million people who trade crypto. I've seen other estimates that say 30% of the people have touched crypto. I'm not sure which one is true, but I don't know. What do you think? I saw some chain analysis reports on Kenya.
Yeah, in terms of numbers, it's always tricky.
Right.
I'll be honest. I've seen some people say 4.5 million, 6 million, some, way less. For me, I feel like it's somewhere in between. Maybe a million sounds like a more reasonable figure, especially when you look at the volumes, and you look at the awareness. It's a huge part of the population still is not aware. So, and if you are talking about 4-6 million, that's almost what 10% of the population, which is really not likely.
No.
So yeah, I would say it's somewhere in between. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I saw as well. Somewhere around a million seems like a reasonable estimate. But that's quite an industry if you look at it from a peer-to-peer perspective, and quite a lot of daily volume probably on the peer-to-peer platforms. So it's very fascinating. David, I think we've covered pretty much an hour, apart from the little disruption that we had. Um, are there any good events? I hope to meet you in Kenya. I hope that there will be some conference or some event, and maybe Valor will be there. What's popular in Kenya?
Yeah, so what's popular is we always have an yearly event that happens, a tech summit. I think that's usually where we get a lot of tech people coming together. But other than that, there are always small events happening. At BitKE, we are always organizing as well, events. I'll hopefully invite you guys someday, and then you guys can come over. Yeah, but other than that, I think you can always look out for small things that are happening here and there. There are so many meetups. We're always featuring a lot of this on our website as well. Yeah, so there's always a lot of activity happening. Yeah, but I think look out for the Tech Summit. I think that's one key event.
Okay, I will do it. So, okay, I want to thank you, David, for this wonderful chat. Really interesting. I really love learning about Kenya. I've never been there. Um, so I do really hope to visit, whether it's this year or next year. Um, so yeah, I want to thank you.
Well, Karibu.
Huh? Karibu?
All right. Karibu means welcome in Kenya, so Karibu.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. What is the language? What is the dominant language in Kenya?
That's Swahili, so
Swahili.
Karibu is Swahili. Yeah, that's the dominant language.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much again, David, and I hope we can speak again, meet soon, and I hope people at home enjoyed it, including our growing Kenyan audience. So thank you very much.